Hi, welcome to another episode of Managing Well. I'm your host, Tonya Ladipo, and I'm excited to continue our four-part series on relationships at work with Elizabeth Byrne. Welcome, Elizabeth, again.
Thanks.
Yes. So today we're going to be talking about rupture and repair in relationships. But before we do that, just want to do a kind of quick recap of what we talked about in the first two parts, which is setting the foundation for relationships. And then also what happens when conflict happens, which is inevitable at work. And so I think just some of the key takeaways, and Elizabeth, feel free to chime in, about the importance of how do you set strong relationships at work, and what exactly do you need to do to know people on your team, to respond to people on your team. And kind of, we talked also about how the way we are in relationships outside of work really influences how we are at work. Is there anything you want to build on?
Just also the importance of checking in, like even if things are going well, to make space to not just ride that out, but to be intentional, to maintain that intentional approach.
Yes, I'm glad you said that, right? Because when we're talking about setting a foundation, you think, oh, it's the beginning of a relationship, but re-establishing the foundation, checking in on existing relationships, and kind of the best way to do that from a management perspective is definitely what we talked about in the first part. And then the second part, how do we manage conflict in the workplace? Go ahead.
Staying in the conversation, not, we talked a lot about anticipating it, accepting that conflict is going to happen. Doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It's just a natural way that people relate to each other when needs are different, and building that confidence and I guess just comfort, for lack of a better word, with having difficult conversations, recognizing that it's not always as big as it might seem, realizing what's getting activated within us. We talked about the iceberg kind of image of what is underneath the surface, for us in those moments, and taking care of that so that we can just address the conflict at hand.
Yes, which you reminded me. So if people haven't had a chance to listen to the first two episodes of this series, go back and take a listen, because really paying attention to, like you were saying, Elizabeth, what is going on for us internally as people managers and as people that is being activated that we are bringing into the workplace, and then what skills do we need to manage that so that we're being more effective and leading our team and ourselves, right? And for ourselves. So today, as we're talking about, kind of continuing the conversation, really wanting to spend some time talking about ruptures in relationships. So we talked about the conflict. And so kind of conflict, like if there's an incident, a situation, but I think rupture, and I want to hear your thoughts about this, Elizabeth. Rupture is kind of the break in a relationship that happens, right?
Yeah, the disconnection of trust, or disconnection in the relationship that also impacts trust.
Yes. And when we say trust, the way I'm thinking of trust, I was going to say especially in the workplace, but maybe this is what I think of trust, is knowing that you'll do what you say you're going to do, right? Knowing that I can count on you, that I can rely on you. Would you add anything?
Absolutely. I think, can I count on what you say? Will you follow through? And also, there's something I think too around like the consistency of how you treat me. Can I trust how you're going to treat me? Or does that fluctuate based on your mood or your stress level, or what's going on with your supervisors, that type of thing, like, or is it that regardless of what's going on, there's a certain level of consistency in how we're going to relate to each other?
I'm settling into what you were just saying when I'm thinking about it from relationships in the workplace. whether it's peer-to-peer, manager to direct report, or manager to their own manager. And I'm thinking of all of the micro moments that happen that can put more into the bucket of trust, and all the micro moments that happen that could put more into the buckets of dismantling trust, which leads to the rupture. And so what are some of the ways you're thinking of actions that we take, sometimes intentionally and sometimes, a lot of times not, that really dismantle that trust that leads to the disconnection of a relationship?
I think it makes me think, for the small moments, makes me think about forgetting things, forgetting components of deliverables that other people are relying on, or doing them in a sloppy, rushed way and not bringing my best, right? Like, especially if it's with a team that knows the quality that you're capable of, that can really actually be even more damaging, I think, when you know what someone is capable of, and then you see that they're just sort of dialing it in. Makes me think about the not following through, or making promises that aren't then kept, which sometimes then leads to managers not saying things firmly at all about someone's career advances or changes in salary or benefits or things that could happen for them that are enticing. And that, like, sort of wishy-washy, like hard to nail down piece erodes trust. And then, we have like the bigger moments of losing one's temper, expelling stress onto the team, activating, like just kind of creating an environment of fear, those types of stuff. Yeah.
No, I wanted to just kind of flesh out more when you were saying losing one's temper, because I think that can mean different things to different people. And so, like, literally yelling at work, cursing at work. And I remember earlier in my career, and even now I'm still like, what, people do that? Because, like, to me, it's just so unacceptable. But that is how some people interact at work, which can lead to a lot of disconnection and rupture, kind of in the big moments. And I think the micro, well, they might, I don't know if they're micro or big, but when you're talking about not being transparent about perhaps things that could impact somebody's career, whether it's pay or benefits, or right. But also, I think you were saying this earlier, kind of dangling promotions for people, like saying, well, if you do this, you could be up for promotion, and then for people to constantly hear that without getting promoted, right? So lip service, right? Being told one thing, but there's a disconnect. There's no action to it.
Right. Having the bar moved.
Yes.
And sometimes managers are in a position where the bar got moved and it wasn't their choice.
Right.
Right. And so there's an opportunity for transparency there. And I think because that can be a tricky conversation, sometimes folks will just sort of shrug it off and say, well, maybe next cycle. And they just leave it at that, as opposed to being able to articulate, like, listen, I thought we were on the same page and the bar got moved for all of us. And so I want to help you. Like, I'm not giving up. Like, this isn't personal to you, even though obviously it is so personal to you, right? Both things are true. And here's some of the things I want to work with you around to help set you up to be in the best position for promotion next time. So being able to share the frustration that maybe you share with them, but not, this is where sometimes that, we talk about relationships, we, are in every aspect of our life. Like I have seen in workplaces where a manager will kind of come at it from the same place of like, well, this was harder for me. Like, I get that this is hard for you, but you don't understand how hard this is for me. I have to have this conversation now with 5 people, like stop, put that on the do not do list, because it doesn't help the situation at all. And if anything, now you're delivering difficult news, and also I don't want to talk to you anymore.
I actually I want to interject here because it reminds me of what we were talking about in the second episode about kind of when conflict happens. And to your point, when managers say and feel, and I feel this is so hard for me. And so I just want to kind of pause, because I think that's really valid, not to say that it's harder, but to say it is so hard for you, and to have hard conversations with multiple people. Like, that is really, really true. And that needs attention, that angst, that
yes,
fear, that sadness, that disappointment, whatever, like that needs attention. Being in leadership means being thoughtful of where you put that to get the appropriate attention. So that gets attention from your peers. That gets attention from your supervisor, not the people who report to you, right? That's when it's inappropriate. Right. And to your point, Elizabeth, that can cause a significant rupture from your direct reports, because why would they, if you're making a problem that is impacting the direct report, if you're minimizing it, why would they continue to trust you?
Right.
Or come to you?
Right. You're not offering me empathy.
Yes.
You're not trying to understand how the situation is for me. There's a lot of that where people bleed into the like time and place, right? Like, to your point, being thoughtful about who it is that I reach out to for those things makes me think of the ring theory, right? Of like the person in the center, we don't dump in, we have to dump out. Right? Find somebody that is slightly less impacted by this piece and go talk to them.
I want to go back to something you were saying earlier about how often actually for management, when you're in management, things outside of your control, sometimes outside of the company's control, and then sometimes within the company's control, but outside of your control, right? You have to pass on, and sometimes people get stuck and scared and don't say anything, so they're less transparent, and then it can become bigger. And as you were talking, I was actually thinking about the pandemic. I was thinking about the start of the pandemic and how that was out of out of people's control, and it did impact everybody, though it impacted people very differently. And so I think what kind of came to mind is, how do we as managers, and even people, use the opportunity that's presented to us for connection and good, rather than rupture and repair?
So do you mean like when there's a really difficult situation or a conflict that could cause disconnection, how do we see that as an opportunity for working through it together?
Yes. I think that is exactly what I'm saying. Like, so, rupture, I keep saying rupture, like when we're losing trust, when there's disconnection, when we're not feeling like we are aligned anymore, that happens in workplace relationships, and it happens in personal relationships. And so by the time somebody is speaking on this, it's been building. It's not just this one moment of you responding to my email late that I'm upset by.
Yeah.
It's been a pattern before I get to for most people, before I get to the point of actually saying something. And so I think, I'm thinking of my own personal, I'm thinking of myself, and I'm thinking of, relationships I've had and have, and how they've shifted, I think, over time. And so in kind of preparation for our conversation today, I was thinking, well, how have they shifted? Why have they shifted? And I realized, like, one pattern, we all have patterns, but one pattern that I see in my relationships is how I show up in my relationships and what has needed to shift. So, like, kind of by nature, I like being generous. That feels really good to me. And I've been generous without, when I say without regard, perhaps without the best boundaries of, like, does that work? Does that work for me? I'm not necessarily thoughtful with my generosity. And so, in the past couple of years, I've been more thoughtful of, like, oh, who do I want to be generous with? Is this relationship reciprocal, where I feel like my generosity is valued and appreciated, and I'm also feeling like I'm receiving that in return? And so as I kind of look at those relationships and start communicating differently, of saying, like, oh, this is actually what I need, not just I want to give, but this is what I need. The shift I've noticed in me being more communicative was some relationships fell away, right? Because it was no longer working. And then some relationships got significantly deeper and more fruitful and rich. And so I think what I'm kind of bringing into, like, what I'm trying to bring into to the conversation is, when there's conflict and there's rupture and there's disconnect, usually in the moment it doesn't feel great. But I think there is a tremendous opportunity to build deeper work relationships and transform what wasn't working. And there's also the opportunity for the relationship to end because it doesn't work.
I feel like what I'm hearing is partly this awareness that, like, we can sometimes prevent rupture based on our actions and the way that we relate to each other, and that when there is rupture, there's that can impact whether or not we bring our whole selves. And so we're in a place of choice in those moments of, am I going to be transparent? Am I going to be vulnerable and share how this has impacted me, what my expectations had been, what I am hoping for moving forward? How are we going to address this? Or am I going to slowly guard up more and start looking for another job, start looking for another team to work on? Am I going to slowly write my manager off or my team off and just retreat?
I didn't realize what you're saying. That's not what I was thinking. And I think it's so, no, I think that's so on point of how to proactively avoid ruptures, not avoid conflicts. That's human. We're going to have conflicts, but how to avoid the buildup that I was talking about, right? By being honest with yourself about what your expectations are, what your needs are, what your desires are, and then proactively communicating that, right?
And it takes so much courage.
Right? Which is the funny. So here's the thing for people who might not be familiar with me and Elizabeth. So we're both therapists by training, and so I just want to put that in because this is hard. This is hard for us, and this is what we went to school for. This is what we help other people do, to be vulnerable and share their
feelings.
emotions. Elizabeth and I often have colorful texts going back and forth with each other about feelings because it is hard to be that transparent. And really, I think the risk of, if I tell you my expectation, to risk that you will, even if you don't meet it, but that you will honor it, that you won't judge it.
Yes.
Right? That you might say, Tonya, I hear that you want me to respond to your emails within an hour. I understand how important that is to you. I'm not going to be able to do that, but I can do it within 48 hours, within the day. Those micro moments, as opposed to, Tonya, I know you want me to respond within an hour and there's no way I'm doing it. That's ridiculous. It's crazy. I can't even believe you asked me to do that. Right? Like that's the
impossible.
That's impossible. Of like, am I going to be shot down? Especially the bigger the emotional risk in saying what we need and want.
Right. And this is where like who we are as humans like bleeds right on into the workplace, because if in other areas of your life you regularly have that experience of every time I ask for what I want or say what I need, people tell me why I don't deserve it, or people tell me why I'm asking for too much. Why is that not going to show up at work? Of course it's going to show up at work. But because people are trying to be more professional, it might show up in less language, in more awkward communication, so that you're not even understanding what you're receiving from me, right? Like, and then, or there's more folks that are just stuffing it down and then falling apart after work, and feeling really burnt out and,
and starting to look for a new job.
Yeah.
And the just basic economics of people leaving organizations and you having to hire and onboard somebody else, like, it's not ideal. It is not ideal. You want to keep great talent. And there's so many retention programs I think that organizations have. And I think these micro moments with direct managers, I think, tends to really influence people's decisions to stay or not.
Yeah. And when you were saying about, just the vulnerability of sharing a want or a need or an expectation, and how is it going to be held or respected, the image that popped into my mind was like when a pet turns over and shows you their belly. Like, what kind of management style do you have? Do you take a minute and rub that belly, or do you like push them out of the way? Right? Like, I mean, that might sound really extreme in both ways, but like, that is how folks show up. Are they quick to dismiss? I have too much on my plate. I don't have time to hear your fantasies about how this workplace could be. Like, it is what it is. We got to work with what we got. Right? Like, am I doing that, or can I breathe and give you 30 seconds of my time and acknowledge, like, you know what, I wish we could do that. Like, I don't know if I have the brain capacity to like go down that road with you right now, but I would love that. And maybe then I'm putting the opportunity back to you of like, love to see a proposal.
Yes.
If you could actually like monetize this or actualize this or put it in a way that it doesn't have a negative impact on the flow of business, I would love to see a proposal.
And then when I see the proposal, let me talk to you about how, like, what needs to be even better, what is really strong here, because I'm giving you this feedback, because the next step is then together, we're going to take that to my manager and I'm going to share your idea, or I'm going to, I won't share it. I'm going to open the door for you to share your idea. Right.
Yes.
And like, here we are talking about progression because you've taken the 30 seconds that Elizabeth just talked about without putting more on your plate when you know you don't have the capacity, right? So that's that honesty, that's that transparency, and simultaneously giving an opportunity to a direct report who's excited about something. And so it's how it all works together.
You know, that's a really great point, Tonya, of like where rupture happens is crushing people's excitement or joy that they're bringing. You know, like on Monday mornings, are you showing up bubbly and ready for the day? And I'm grumpy and don't talk to me yet, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like there's thinking about ways that in management, how we have impact on folks and how those things can cause rupture. Of like, oh, I'm never going to grow. Like, you know, your team might start to think like, I'm never going to grow on this team because they never want to hear my ideas unless it's about the deliverables that we have to do. And I'm bored with that. And I'm thinking bigger things. And, you know, as a manager, I'm missing out on an opportunity of a rising star who, quite honestly, could become my manager in several years. You know, like that's one of the things I think that can be so helpful and applied in any industry, is something that was impressed upon us in my grad school program, was be mindful of your behavior out in the world because anybody can be a client at any time.
A client or a boss.
Well, exactly. In this case, right? Like anybody could become your boss at any time, you know, at the rate that things move. And so, you know, just being mindful of those ruptures that can happen just because I'm not willing to step into your excitement with you momentarily. And if that's the case, why am I so like dedicated and anchored in like, why am I being rigid in the negative?
When you said rigid, I was thinking I was in conversation with Dr. Natalie Nixon about kind of rigor and wonder and her difference between rigor versus rigidity. And like rigidity is really keeping things exactly the same, which means there's no growth, there's no innovation, there's no creativity. But rigor, kind of the discipline and the discipline that's needed in the workplace. As a manager, I'm thinking the discipline to show up ready to receive. And so all of the pre-work that we have to do to be able to enter a room or a Zoom call with energy that is ready for the moment, right? And so that's work that you're not getting paid for, I want to say, and also work that is necessary to do your job well. So whether that, and that's simple to big things, like making sure that you have a full belly if that's what you need to start the day, making sure you have something to drink if that's what you need, like whatever your physical needs are, that they're tended to, right? And if you've had a hard day or night, personally, whatever emotional needs that you might need. And it doesn't mean you're going to solve all your personal problems before you start your workday, but do you need to journal about them? Do you need to talk about them? Do you need to listen to music so that you can intentionally compartmentalize them and come back to them at the end of your workday? Are all things I think that I'm going back to your your comment, Elizabeth, about preventing ruptures.
Yeah, when I'm listening to you list those things off, like there's a level of maturity that's required to do those things, even when we don't feel like it, or when we're thinking, well, why do I have to? I didn't create this problem. Like, I want to have to journal or go for a walk. It's not, I didn't do this, right? Like, but like, that's the thing, is like, okay, so maybe you didn't create this situation or this rupture, but now you're in it. And so what you gonna do? Like, are we gonna do the thing that like helps us to stay grounded and calm and centered and able to make really sound decisions? Or are we going to let our inner teenager make the decisions for us and rebel against it and have a bigger issue on our hands at the end of the day or tomorrow?
You know, that reminds me of a time where this was back when we were in the office. um when so you know we were interacting in the office, and you know, months after the situation happened, I found out that somebody on my team was really upset with me because they thought I didn't speak to them, like that I hadn't said hello or something. um and it shocked me because like that's not like a behavior I would do. Like I don't not say hi to people. So it really surprised me to hear their experience. And it just shocked me. And I want to say, like, I had my own reaction. Like, I don't not say hi to people, you know. I say hi to people on the street, and I certainly would do it in like the people I work with. And so I had all my own reactions. I heard about it not the next day, but like months later. Obviously, they were really upset if they were carrying, right? And
Mhm.
so, yes, I had my own reactions that I did not share. That I also, after having my own reactions, had to take a step back and say, you know, whether or not I believe I took that action, that is how they experienced me.
Mhm.
And so I have to attend to that. I have to
Mhm.
address that. You know, I have to say, like, I'm so sorry. Like, I didn't, that's not something that I would normally do. Um, maybe I was rushing and I didn't hear you speak to me. I don't know, but I'm so, so sorry because that's not how I want to treat you.
Mhm.
And that's how you felt about me. I could get stuck in like, why do I have to apologize for something I didn't do? Something happened. Somebody was really upset. It's my
Mhm.
responsibility to address it.
And tending to someone in that way shows care. It's not a heavy lift for you, and it has a huge impact
Yeah.
because people come into the workplace with all kinds of previous experiences. They have that entire huge iceberg under the surface.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to impact how they receive different pieces of information. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I mean, I think most people have had at least one experience of being in what might be considered a toxic work environment.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a long time to heal coming out of that and to trust that you are actually in a safer space and to figure out what the quirks are of your new location,
Yeah.
you know, and your new teammates, because there's always going to be something, because people are people.
Yes. Yes. And I think, to your point, for us as people managers, the responsibility to create that sense of safety,
Mhm.
right? Which means that when there is an issue, that we speak on it, that we address it, we talk about it with concern. Um, and I think the last piece I'm thinking of is the accountability.
Yes.
So circling back to that person to see if there's anything else that they need, to see if they've noticed a change in behavior, to put things in place, especially when you're the one in power, to put checks and balances in for yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that if you're working on changing a behavior to make it better for your team, you've got somebody like a coach, a peer that you're meeting with on a regular basis to
Mm-hmm.
hold you accountable for the changes you need to make.
Mm-hmm. 100%. Because words are just words if we don't back them up with behavior.
Yes, I feel like that's one of the biggest pain points we hear from individual contributors.
Yes.
even the ones who are like, my manager cares about me, they listen to me, but when I bring problems, nothing actually ever changes, right? And so that's where like there's the transparency and communication about what can happen, what can't happen, and then accountability and taking action.
Yeah.
This has been another great conversation. I'm excited to kind of continue with our final episode in the series, which is really going to be, so how do we talk about maintaining and growing relationships for the long haul? And so we're thinking about and talking about the workplace, but it's true for other relationships too, right? Ideally, you have team members that are with the organization for many, many years. And it doesn't mean they're in the same role per se. But we'll talk more about that next time. Any lasting thoughts that you have, Elizabeth, before we wrap up?
No, just thank you so much for the opportunity for this conversation.
I'm glad we're doing it together. And if people who are listening or watching have any questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you. It really kind of helps us to hear from you about what is resonating with you, what you want more of. So we're looking forward to getting your input, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to Managing Well. Please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to learn more about today's episode, go to theladipogroup.com/podcast for a worksheet on today's episode. A special thanks to my podcast team and the Ladipo Group who supports this show. Managing Well is produced and edited by Black Faves Brand Studio. I'm your host, Tonya Ladipo. If you have any questions or topics you want to discuss, email me at managingwellpodcast@theladipogroup.com.